Welcome to Dreamy Tales English. I'm David. Tonight, we have a special story for you. It's called The Bullet Train to Dali. Dali is a city in Yunnan province that has been called one of the most beautiful places in China. It sits between Irai Lake and the Zhongshan Mountains, where the air is crisp and the sky is always blue. For centuries, Dali was isolated, accessible only by mountain roads that wound through tunnels and overpasses, taking days to traverse. But in 2024, something changed. A high-speed railway line was completed, connecting Dali to Kunming, the provincial capital, in just 2 hours. Suddenly, the ancient city was no longer hidden in the mountains. It was connected to the world. The train that runs between Kunming and Dali is one of the fastest in the world, capable of reaching speeds of 350 kilometers per hour. It is sleek and modern, with panoramic windows that allow passengers to watch the landscape rush by like a living painting. The mountains give way to valleys, the valleys to terraced fields, the terraced fields to small villages nestled in the hills. And as the train approaches Dali, the scenery changes one last time. The Zhongshan Mountains rise before you, their peaks capped with snow, their slopes covered in pine forests and wildflowers. But the most remarkable thing about the Dali train is not its speed or its scenery. It is the people who ride it. Among them was a young man named Hao. He was 28 years old, a software engineer from Shenzhen, and he had never been to Yunnan before. He had heard about Dali from his friends. They described it as a place where time moves slowly, where the mountains are sacred, and where the lake reflects the sky like a mirror. They told him that Dali was the kind of place where you could disappear and find yourself at the same time. Hao had been feeling lost lately. He had spent the last 5 years working at a tech company in Shenzhen, writing code for apps that nobody needed, living in an apartment that was too small and too quiet, eating meals that tasted like nothing at all. He had saved money, bought a car, and achieved everything his parents had dreamed of for him. But somewhere along the way, he had lost something he couldn't name. So he decided to go to Dali. Not to live there, not yet, anyway, but to visit. To see if the stories were true. To see if he could find himself. He booked a ticket on the bullet train from Shenzhen to Kunming, then transferred to the Dali line. The journey took approximately 6 hours, a lifetime in the world of high-speed rail, but a blink of an eye compared to the days it would have taken just a few years ago. As the train pulled out of Kunming station and began its ascent into the mountains, Hao pressed his face against the window and watched the landscape unfold. The terrain was unlike anything he had ever seen, green hills rolling into the distance, rivers winding through valleys like silver ribbons, and small villages perched on the slopes like nests built by birds. He noticed that the villages were different from the ones he had grown up with in Guangdong. The houses were made of wood and stone, with tiled roofs and carved balconies. The people wore traditional clothing, colorful embroidered jackets and wide-brimmed hats. And the fields were terraced, carved into the mountainside like steps leading to heaven. A fellow passenger, an elderly woman sitting across from him, noticed him staring out the window. "You have never seen terraced fields before?" she asked. "No," Hao said. "I have never been to Yunnan." The woman smiled. "Then you are in for a treat. Yunnan is the most beautiful province in China. It has mountains, lakes, forests, and more ethnic groups than any other place in the country. 26 different peoples, each with their own language, their own clothing, and their own traditions." Hao was surprised. 26. I did not know that. That is the beauty of China, the woman said. It is not one thing. It is many things. And the more you travel, the more you realize how much there is to learn. They talked for the rest of the journey. The woman's name was Auntie Chen, and she was from Dali. She had lived in Kunming for 40 years, but every spring she returned to her hometown to visit her grandchildren and watch the flowers bloom. When I was a girl, Auntie Chen said, it took me 3 days to travel from Kunming to Dali. I walked most of the way, carrying my belongings on my back. The mountain roads were dangerous, steep, narrow, and full of rocks. But I did not mind. I loved the journey. I loved seeing the villages, the fields, and the mountains along the way. Every step was a discovery. She paused and looked out the window at the passing landscape. Now it takes 2 hours. 2 hours. When I first heard that the bullet train was being built, I was skeptical. I thought it would ruin the magic of the journey. But when it opened, I was wrong. The train did not ruin the magic. It revealed it. Because now, people who would never have come to Dali before can come. They can see the beauty. They can learn about our culture. And they can take a piece of it with them when they leave. Hao thought about this. He had always believed that speed and progress were the enemies of beauty and tradition. But Auntie Chen was telling him that they could also be their allies, that the bullet train was not destroying Dali, but connecting it to the world. When they arrived in Dali, Auntie Chen hugged Hao and wished him well. Enjoy your stay, she said. And remember, the fastest way to find yourself is to slow down. Hao checked into a small guest house near Rai Lake, a family run and owned by a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Zhao, who had converted their traditional by minority home into a boutique hotel. The guest house was simple but beautiful, whitewashed walls, wooden floors, and a courtyard filled with flowers. From the rooftop terrace, Hao could see the lake and the mountains beyond, and he felt something inside him relax for the first time in years. Over the next 3 days, Hao explored Dali. He walked along the shore of Rai Lake, watching the fishermen cast their nets and the ducks swim in circles. He climbed the trails of Tsangshan Mountain, breathing in the scent of pine and wildflowers. He visited the ancient old town, where narrow streets lined with shops and restaurants stretched from one end of the city to the other. And he ate food he had never tasted before: rice noodles, dairy fan, wild mushroom hot pot, and a spicy dish called crossing the bridge noodles that had been named after a legend about a wife who carried hot soup across a bridge to her husband. On his second day in Dali, Hao met a young woman named Lila at a cafe near the lake. Lila was from Germany, and she had been living in Dali for 2 years, teaching English, learning Chinese, and studying the Bai-minority culture. She had come to China on a whim, drawn by a photograph she had seen online of Rai Lake at sunset. And she had never left. I fell in love with this place the moment I arrived, she said. The mountains, the lake, the people, the food, everything here is beautiful. And the best part is that nobody rushes. People take their time. They enjoy life. They do not chase success. They define it for themselves. Hao looked at her and felt a pang of jealousy. How do you do it? He asked. How do you just stay? Lila smiled. Because I realized that success is not about money or status. It is about happiness. And happiness is not something you find. It is something you create. Every day. In every moment. Hao thought about this as they sat by the lake, watching the sun set behind the Zhongshan Mountains. He thought about his life in Shenzhen, the long hours, the tight deadlines, the constant pressure to achieve more and more and more. He thought about how he had spent 5 years chasing success and had never once asked himself what success actually meant. And he thought about Auntie Chen's words on the train, the fastest way to find yourself is to slow down. On his last day in Dali, Hao took the bullet train back to Kunming. As the train pulled out of the station and began its descent into the valley, he pressed his face against the window and watched Dali disappear into the distance. The mountains, the lake, the old town, the guest house, and Lila, all of it fading away like a dream. But something had changed. He was no longer the same person who had boarded the train 3 days earlier. He was slower, quieter, and more thoughtful. He had found something he had been looking for without knowing it, not a new job, not a new apartment, not a new relationship. He had found himself. When he arrived in Kunming, he did not get on the train back to Shenzhen. Instead, he walked to the airport and booked a flight to Berlin, where Lila was teaching English at a small language school. He did not know what he was doing. He did not have a plan. But he knew one thing: he wanted to slow down. He wanted to create happiness instead of chasing success. And he wanted to do it in a place where the mountains were high, the lakes were clear, and the people took their time. As the plane took off from Kunming and soared into the sky, Hao looked down at the landscape below, the terraced fields, the rivers, the villages, and the bullet train track winding through the mountains like a silver ribbon. He smiled and closed his eyes, knowing that he had finally found his way. Good night, and sweet dreams.